So we're here today to talk about the top 10 quarterbacks, our rankings going into the season, going into preseason practices. David, I'm looking forward to this as we rank it, where Tyler Van Dyke's going to go. We've not talked about where each other's list are, where guys are going to be, the rankings. I wanted to kind of just break it out here, and we're going to show you guys. And definitely drop in the comments below. Let us know what you think. Are guys too high, too low? Who are you most excited about? What do you think about Tyler as we talk to primarily the Miami fan base? David, let's get right into it. My top 10 right here going into it. I start off with Drake May at North Carolina, the ACC Player of the Year. I know we struggled down the stretch last year, but I still have him number one. And then I have Jordan Travis, Florida State dual threat quarterback, won 10 games last year. I have him number two. Then I'm going with Riley Leonard out of Duke. And then 4 or 5, I think this is where maybe it gets a little bit interesting. I go Brendan Armstrong, and then I go Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami. Both guys coming off years they wish they'd have back. But I want to get it. We're going to get into some more Tyler Van Dyke stuff, but that's how I have 4 and 5. Brendan makes the transfer to NC State, reunites with his offensive coordinator, Robert Anai, where he had a lot of success there at Virginia the year before when he threw for over 4,000 yards, accounted for 40 touchdowns. So my 6 through 10, and I think where you're looking at this, I think you're looking at it where guys can really step up, starting at number 6 with Cade Klubnik out of Clemson. I know people might have him a little higher, but he's just unproven to me. The Tennessee game late last year in the bowl game, that really didn't set well with me, even though he played well in the ACC title game, and a lot of talent, obviously, with Cade there. Then I go Garrett Schrader out of Syracuse, Jack Plummer, the transfer out of Cal from Louisville. And then the last two guys, again, you're looking at guys that really need to step up. But Phil Jakovic going to Pitt out of BC, and then Emmett Moorhead rounds out my list of my top 10. But really, it starts at the top. Drake May, Jordan Travis. I think you can kind of go either way with those top two guys. Riley Leonard, a solid 3. But I think anywhere from like 3 to 7, I think you can really shuffle it up. But I'm curious what your reaction, David, and then your top 10. What do you got?
Yeah, so let me just start by saying I think your list is perfectly fair. And, I think what you laid out there is definitely a fine list. We're definitely the same at 1 and 2, Drake May. I think if it wasn't for Caleb Williams, he could be the obvious number 1 overall pick in next year's NFL draft. Jordan Travis took a big leap last year at Florida State. Of course, as we know, what makes him special is his dual threat ability. He can hurt you in a lot of ways, and he took that step as a passer last year. And this year, I expect him to put up huge numbers because he has an even better supporting cast this year compared to last year. And then we start to differ, right? I do have Cade Klubnik number 3. And I understand your point. I am definitely projecting. I will admit that on the front end. But I will say, I do think there are maybe some similarities in terms of profile of player between Cade Klubnik and Drake May. Last year, going into last year's season, Cade Klubnik, 5-star recruit. He did get a little bit of playing time, kind of an up and down deal last year, through some interceptions that he would like to take back. But I think he's a guy with a lot of arm talent, and I think he shows the mobility factor that is key in modern quarterback play. So I am a believer there. 4, I really debated between 4 and 5, and I got Tyler Van Dyke 4, Riley Leonard 5, the Duke quarterback. And the reason why I decided to go with Tyler is I can't get it out of my head that stretch he had in 2021 when, for the final 6 games of that season, he threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in every game. You go back and look at the quarterbacks that have done that in the ACC in 5 games, and it's a list that includes Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson, Taj Boyd. So no doubt Tyler wasn't up to that level last year, but I do think, when Miami made some tweaks to their offensive approach following that bye week, he had a monster game against North Carolina, 496 yards, and then followed that up with a 340-yard performance against Virginia Tech. Riley Leonard, I think, is a stud dual threat. I go Garrett Schrader 6. I go Brendan Armstrong 7, another spot we kind of differ on. Yes, he did have that big season last year, or 2 years ago, but last year, man, 7 touchdowns, 12 interception ratio. That's just tough for me. Also, from a Miami standpoint, he's never really impressed me as a passer against Miami. In those 3 starts he had while he was at Virginia, he threw for an average of 219 yards and 1 touchdown in those games. So then I go Jack Plummer, Louisville, transferred him from Cal, Phil Dracovic at Pitt now from Boston College. And then number 10, I go Zach Pyron, the Georgia Tech quarterback, probably going to get his first year as a full-time starter opportunity this season.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. David, let's stay with Tyler. There's a lot of names in there. I know we can get into some dive deep into it with Cade, but with Tyler, you touched on the 6 games, and that gets a lot of credit, a lot of attention. But I want to take that even further. What his first 6 games look like from last year before the injury against Duke, where he missed about half the game, and then also then he, kind of in and out of the lineup since. But if you put those 6 games, he had 1,648 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 3-3 record, had some good games in there, as you mentioned, but also those disappointing performances. Didn't play well against A&M, couldn't get the win there. And then Middle Tennessee certainly stands out as a very disappointing, but averaged 275 yards per game in those 6 games, even with the big game in there. So that's certainly good. So if you take the back end of 2021, the front end, so that's a 12-game sample size, you're looking at a guy that threw for over 3,800 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Miami goes 8-4 during that span, averages 320 yards per game. And I think that's one of the things why you have him 4, I have him 5. And you look at other lists, other people have him down a lot further, down 6, 7, 8, 9. You look at other people that do these kind of lists. And I think that's the one thing that we keep looking at is we do think Tyler does have something in him. That's why I have him 5, essentially why I have Brendan Armstrong 4. You don't like him as much. Those interceptions, the touchdown ratio, yards, everything was really disappointing. But what he did well during that stretch the year before with the big season, I think that's what you're looking at. And I think when you look at a guy like Schrader, for example, a steady guy, he threw for 17 touchdowns last year, ran for 9 more, but he doesn't have those stretches that Brennan and TVD have. And I think from a Miami standpoint, you've got to be excited about Tyler Van Dyke, that he has that potential. And certainly, once again, all these guys, I think that any of them can really shuffle their way into it. But I do think it's a Drake Jordan debate 1 and 2. And I think you could go either way with either of those guys based on how last season went. But Tyler's season, and certainly David, and maybe could comment on this. What do you think? Where are we at with Tyler? Is it going to be more of 21, more of 22? Where do you kind of see it? He certainly has something to prove going into this year.
Yeah, I think those numbers you laid out is kind of what I expect for Tyler over a season. Maybe not 3,800 yards, but I see no reason why he can't throw for 3,200 to 3,500 yards, assuming he's fully healthy, of course, plays the full season. But I think we've learned with Tyler, and this is true of most quarterbacks, the system matters. And I think Mario Cristobal made the switch, hit the reset button from the Josh Gaddis system to now the Shannon Dawson system. And that was done primarily to play to the strengths of Tyler Van Dyke as a quarterback. So they're all in on trying to get the most out of Tyler. And I think we're going to see him be productive this year. Now, how does that translate to wins and losses? I think that depends a lot on the players around him and the defense improving as well, et cetera, et cetera. But those numbers you laid out, 3,800 yards, that might be high, but maybe mid 3,000s and then an 8-4 record. I think that can be a fair-ish expectation for Tyler and the team this year with his play, assuming he does stay healthy.
Can Tyler be one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the conference? Can he have a year where he's considered one of the top 2? Can he unseat Drake or Jordan? How do you see that? How high can Tyler really be? And certainly we're a few weeks away from preseason practices beginning. The season starts really quick, but do you think he can really get up there? What it's going to take? I think certainly wins and losses is going to come down to that, because I think he is going to put up some numbers. But if he's going to be one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the ACC, earn all ACC honors, I think he's going to have to beat Florida State, beat UNC, outplay those guys. And he did have that big game against North Carolina last year. They do lose, but he throws for nearly 500 yards in that game. So something like that, the consistency, but I think it's going to come down to wins and losses for him to be one of those top 2 guys.
Totally agree. Miami's going to have a good season for him to be considered a top 2 quarterback in the conference. I also think too, like when you look, the reason why I have a hard time putting him over Jordan, Travis, is the mobility factor. And I think when you look at the list that, both of our top 10 lists, really it's only Tyler and I guess Jack Plummer are the two kind of pocket passers, guys that aren't necessarily mobile in some way. And that is a key factor in the modern game. Now, Tyler's definitely talented enough to get it done from the pocket, definitely good enough to win plenty of games. But I do think having that mobility factor at quarterback eliminates negative plays, number one, which is huge, and also can generate some explosives too, whether it's buying time or on the ground with the quarterback keepers. I have a hard time seeing Tyler jumping into that top two. But as you're alluding to, it boils down to wins and losses, I think, with the perception factor of Tyler being a top two quarterback in the conference.
And speaking of mobility, let's just run through this down. And this is what stands out with the ACC quarterbacks in general. Jordan Travis, over 400 yards rushing, 7 touchdowns. Riley Leonard, you see the 20 passing touchdowns, but he had 13 rushing, nearly 700 yards on the ground. That's why he's so high on many lists. Garrett Schrader, 9 touchdowns, over 400 yards rushing. Brennan Armstrong had 9 touchdowns 2 years ago. So you're looking at a lot of guys, and that's just not Tyler's game. But these other guys are really certainly able to do that. David, I want to wrap this up. I'm curious what you guys think of this list. You know, who are potential risers? I think Cade Klubnik is one of those guys that can really slide up and down. You know, he's either going to have a really good season, move up. I think there's a lot of unknown for a guy that's really talented, that we did see a lot of positives last year, and essentially Clemson is all in on Cade Klubnik. So they believe highly in him, and certainly talent around him, you know, with Shipley there in particular, but they've got other guys, obviously, and certainly Clemson's going to be one of those teams to watch in the ACC. Some new faces. You mentioned a Jack Plummer, some guys transferring within the conference with Brennan and Phil. So it's going to be interesting. David, I appreciate it. We're going to wrap this up. We're going to do this again. If you want to see more of this video, these kind of ACC rankings, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, but we'll do more of these kind of videos.